Well, hello all, and welcome to this very exciting Civilizations in Review. I am really excited and looking forward to jumping in to this Nubian Empire, our very first one of the many to come. Thank you so much, GFNX, for writing this incredible article. I'm excited to learn about why you chose Kerma and everything, and to our phenomenal other content writer, Yabstra, who wrote Sudan 101, the modern version of this Kerma Empire. So it's really exciting to see the two halves of this conversation today. As a reminder, you're watching us live on Facebook. Thanks for being here. But we also will post this to our website, to our Spotify, to our Instagram, and to our YouTube. So you can see this in a bunch of different ways and engage with the first of many Nubian-based Civilizations in Review. I'm going to throw it to Yapstra to read the 101 word intro that GFNX wrote, and we'll jump from there. But thanks so much for being here and excited to learn.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, Ben, and welcome everyone to Civilizations in Review. Today we'll be discussing an incredible empire with an incredible content writer, Gabriella, and she has spent a great deal of time doing her research and writing about this empire, which we are so excited to dive deep into and learn about. So I'll share with you a little bit about the introduction here. So as the foremost city of Upper Nubia, which is now modern Sudan, Kerma was the capital and base of the most powerful Nubian state of the early 2nd millennium BCE. The civilization of Kerma's culture has been broken down into 4 chronological periods spanning from 3500 to 1500 BCE. The kingdom of Kerma generated wealth primarily through agriculture and trade, and excavations of burial sites and similar styles of pottery suggest that it spanned about 200 miles southward past the 5th cataract of the Nile River. So that's already impressive. And the people of the Kerma used the river as a trading post to import textiles, jewelry, as well as other manufactured goods.
What a wealth of an intro. My goodness, thank you. Let's just jump into this huge time period. I think this is one of the longest empires. I mean, that's 2,000 years plus, probably. Was it a behemoth to write about, given there's so much history to focus on? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, it was unfortunate that, it's such a prominent civilization, but I was not able to find a lot of information about it. And seeing how it does span through 4 periods from 3500 to 1500 BCE, it's kind of interesting to see how there was only information just on how their economic success was their main focus. So their location and their resources were their main, was the main reason why they were so successful.
Fascinating. That's unfortunately a kind of common thread with a lot of these very ancient empires, that it's harder to find history and information, yet they spanned, quintuply as long as many of the ones that are more modern. But fascinating. Let's just talk about their trading and the modern legacy there, and then I'll throw it to Yabsa for any questions that were brought up, especially as our expert on Sudan 101. But yeah, let's talk about the Nile River, obviously the huge sustenance for so many empires and communities. It
was definitely a luxurious trading post, as they say, because of all the jewelry and gold and copper and exotic animals that they had. They also were trading ivory, but most of this was going to Egyptian pharaohs, which is kind of interesting because they were an on and off rival for so long. But the main focus was agriculture and trade. So what they were trading was pottery, jewelry, sheeps, goats, animals, metals, barley, lots of crops. The region is such a fertile center basin of the area. So they had a ton of resources, and that's where most of their success came from.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, since I did writing on Sudan, and I'm sure you know from your writing as well, the Nile River was such an integral part of existence for so many civilizations. And I was super interested reading your part, how, you know, they were actually doing so much better than Egypt at the time. And it came to a point where Egypt ended up kind of taking them over and swallowing them over into the Egyptian Empire. But I kind of wanted you to touch base on that. I was super interested to hear, what do you think were like the weakening points of the empire during the time when they ended up being taken over by Egypt? I'm not sure if you got any research out of that.
Yeah. So we do know that they were the main rival, and you know, the decline was ultimately because of Egypt going into Lower Nubia. But there was not really much information that I had found as to what was their weakest points, because they had such great economic success and they had such great resources. But I think it was a matter of one civilization, you know, taking over the next. And it was just like a slow process.
Exactly. Yeah, as I was reading through, I was super impressed by the trade and the agriculture, and pretty disappointed to hear that most of their gold and barley and agriculture goes straight to the pharaohs in Egypt. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was kind of thinking on that fact myself. You know, what was the weakening point? But civilizations die, new ones come about, so that is pretty organic. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I don't want to just talk about trade this whole podcast, but I just find it
Yeah.
so fascinating. You know, a lot of how the other civilizations that we've talked about kind of survive either through trade or through conquest. Kind of like the only really two ways that most of these ancient empires, communities, civilizations, whatnot, thrive. And clearly Kerma is trading 100%.
Mhm.
But it sounds like in a way it's kind of a like luxury place for Egypt, not its own empire. And I'm curious if that's just the way that they traded, or if there was trading in both directions, or other things as well, if they weren't just to the Egyptian pharaohs.
Yeah, so they were trading all over, but most of the pharaohs were the ones, you know, trading those larger items, the luxurious items that are higher ticket. But they were trading because of their location on the Nile. They were trading across all of Africa, the Red Sea, and you know, it's not just Egypt, but they were the ones that were taking the luxurious items. I'm sure they were trading more of their smaller things to people, you know, in Africa, across Africa.
Yeah, and I want to throw in a question here also, just because I'm interested. But did you touch base on anything in regard to like a writing system? Because when I was reading through multiple websites, it had mentioned that they didn't really have a writing system, and most of them were hieroglyphics and stuff like that. So I was kind of interested if that tied in with the structures that they created. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but I'm going to try my best. Probably Defufas. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was
Yeah.
wondering, did they ever record any historical information in those walls, like, you know, they do with the pyramids in Egypt, or how did that work?
I did, yeah, that was something that kept coming up, was that they didn't have like a written language. So I do believe that it was something symbolic, or some kind of um, pottery is mostly, you know, how they were expressing or showing things that were happening. So they were doing detailed pottery, but there was no written language. So I think that is why they also don't have much information on them, is because there's nothing really to interpret.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. The main image for the Kerma Empire is a piece of their pottery that is still
Mm-hmm.
existing today, which is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely incredible how long it lasts.
Yeah.
That's really, really fascinating. I didn't realize they did not have a written language, and probably why it was a bit harder to do that research, but good on you for bringing it together. You mentioned a little bit in the modern influence section about, and this really ties in with you, Yaps, that are writing Sudan 101. You know, the religious aspect of the Kerma kingdom. I'm curious if you know more about sort of what their focus was, and clearly how it has stayed present in modern Sudan.
I think that their main focus was probably afterlife as well, just because of the large fortresses that they had, the Defufas. So once they excavated those, I think they found a lot of jewelry and pottery underneath. And so I would say that that was like the most important thing. And they also were well known for their urban zones and like mixing cultures within their city. So like the structure had religious buildings as well as bakeries and markets, and that was such a different kind of city planning that any civilization had really ever seen at that time.
And I really wanted to be able to find a picture of it, but the way I imagined it is like, and the way you wrote about it kind of made me see it as like a big, bustling city right in the middle, and then on the outer side, like a huge tower with, soldiers standing on guard. Because with any of these civilizations, there's always a chance that you can be attacked. And so that was super interesting. And I was even checking to see if there were any drawings. But with Sudan, I know it was majority Shia Muslims, and religiously, you'll see a bunch of mosques and masjids that will have engravings into the actual walls with Arabic. So majority of them were Muslim, and they definitely showed it through architecture, which is wonderful and still very beautiful. So yeah, I wanted to also bring that up.
Amazing, yeah. They also were known for influencing modern day public drinking fountains, which I think is really interesting. So they developed some way of holding water and preserving water in their pottery pieces and large ceramic vessels. So I think that's really interesting because that's something that is so important today.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about that? If you research more, that is really cool and really fascinating.
Yeah, all I know really is that they were like very large vessels, that they would, but they knew that they needed to provide public water, water to the public. And since their cities were so structurally, well maintained, they were able to implement like these drinking fountains, which is what we use nowadays to get water. I mean, in schools and public areas. So I think that's such a great influence.
That is so cool. Wow, go for it, Yepsra. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, like, did you do any research on the food? Because with me writing on Sudan, I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and so I was super interested to see, what types of ties comes about with just being, in the East. And so I was finding a lot of food that were very similar, not just in taste, but in looks and everything like that. So I was wondering, are there any foods that are still eaten today that were started by this empire that's still, showing up within Sudan or other parts?
I didn't do any research in that aspect, but I'm sure there are so many foods that are still local to that region that they incorporate, in their meals nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I love it. This is so fascinating. Let's jump into the government of the Kerma. I think I find this one of the most fascinating parts of each empire is how they were ruled. And in many cases, after the first or second person ruled, the empire quickly crumbled. But not in the case of the Kerma at all, clearly, as they lasted for so many years, 2 full millennia. You mentioned in the ruling system section of your article the elite class political power authority aspects, which is fascinating. But I'm curious, how that was sort of in your research broken down more clearly. So yeah, jump into it. Your background and learning about the Kerma's ruling system.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was too knowledgeable with, the names of the rulers, but what I did notice is that the way that the city was organized actually helped them find a new system of governorship. And so it kind of resembled an oligarchy, and they had distributed their powers between priests, royalty, and military. So I would say that I think that was a very advanced way of, leading this civilization where it wasn't just under, one person's rule. It was kind of well equally distributed throughout the city and throughout, I guess, different distributions of power. So it could be out through religious organization or royal organizations, and military. So I think that evidence is kind of prominent in probably the success of the civilization in itself.
And one super cool thing that I learned with their military is that they were the very first empire to start using elephants in active combat. So when I was reading that, I was like, can you imagine an elephant just storming towards you? I would get out of there. So that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I didn't actually read that, so that's very interesting that would be a method for them to use.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Do you have a little bit more about that, Yapsara? That's so fascinating.
I wish I did. Like we had mentioned before, there's just so limited information about this empire, just because it gets lost in translation. There was no really a writing system. But in regards to not just elephants, I believe I also read that they used, they're known as, like, I want to say, the bow empire, because they used a lot of archery in their military, and they also poisoned the tip of that of that bow there. So I'm pretty sure that was lethal. But that was, one of the ways that they made sure that their military was strong and mighty and sustained for many, many, many years, as we mentioned before. So yeah, that was just super interesting to read.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, that's probably how they survived for 2,000 years, even though there's nothing written. I'm going to make that guess that they're a very strong empire with huge elephants looming towards you probably will keep them around for many years. Fascinating. This is so cool. I'm curious, Yabsura, for you, I mean, I know this is about the Kerma, but as it relates to modern Sudan, if when you were writing Sudan 101, there was some impact of the 3,000 years prior of what the Kerma Empire did in its legacy.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm sure. I wish, it could have been like clear cut, like here are the similarities, the differences, because that would have made it so much more easier.
Sure.
But and that's why I had asked with food, like, are there any similarities? Because I'm sure that ended up affecting it one way or another. And with religion, even though most of them focused with, the afterlife, as the Egyptian Empire did also, they were also Muslims that, that existed within that civilization, and ended up carrying over into current Sudan. So that was super interesting for me to learn about. And then the basis of the 5 pillars as well, which we all know is a very integral part of Islamic faith that I saw carrying out throughout both civilizations.
Wow. Yeah. Very, 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 very cool and fascinating. I find this kind of direct connection really, really, really interesting, even if it's not as clearly written. I think you just mentioned a lot of things right there. And we will write the next Kerma book, I guess, for other future scholars. Yeah, I mean, I just really love GFNX that you've written so much about the luxurious trading and connections and regional points. Almost all of your sections mention this because it was such a vital part of this empire. I don't want to keep sticking with trade, but you just talk about so many types of things that they engage with. That was very much their legacy. And if you have anything else you wanted to mention about it, would be really wonderful.
Yeah, other than trade, I would say that they developed a lot of new industries and industries that just furthered their their trade. But it was metalworking, mining, and pottery making, and I think those things are really vital as well for their economics, because how else would they be able to transport things and move things around if they didn't have those industries? So I think it was such a prominent civilization just because of how it utilized every resource that it had, for sure.
Incredible. Incredible. I just, I find it so fascinating that its key accomplishments and its economics and its allies and rivals all revolve around this trading hub. I'm curious as well, speaking of trading, its relationship with the other Nubian kingdoms. I know you mentioned the Kingdom of Kush a little bit here, but if you have any more sort of background with the many Nubian kingdoms that existed.
I'm not familiar. I actually was very unfamiliar with Kerma in general, and then the Kingdom of Kush, and so this is all very new to me. So I didn't get to further my research in
Well, then
that.
I'll start with a different question. Why did you choose the Kerma Empire then? What did you want to learn more
It
about Nubia?
literally just stood out to me because I had never seen that word. I'm not much of of a historical person. I'm more into the arts and culture, so it's really nice to see things like that. And so when you asked me what I wanted to do, I saw something new, and I was like, let me just go for it.
And to lead into a art-heavy empire,
Yeah,
thousands of years old. What a beautiful coincidence! I love that.
yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, to be honest with you, also, Karma, just as soon as I saw the name, I was like, I've never heard of this before. Like, I need to read more. And then I came across the fact that there's not much. So that was hard, but it was super interesting to read, to learn about, and see how it all ties to like the Kush Empire that Ben just mentioned, Nubia, Sudan. So I like how they all are very integral to the current societies.
Well, and that's one of the many reasons we have so many empires for Civilizations 101 is exactly what you both said. Oh, I've never heard of this. And yet look how quintessential modern drinking fountains, elephants, poisons,
Yeah.
arrows, like probably the food of modern Sudan all came from this one thing. And so it's so crucial to have these conversations. You know, Megan and I, the co-founders, were very intentional that Rome and Greece would not be in our civilizations list because it's already so well known. Yes, they had land in the yes, they had empires and legacies and cities they left behind. However, there are so many more important things that are overlooked and need to be talked about. Kerma very much being one of them. So I'm so appreciative that you took that leap, GFNX, to something you had no idea about. And look at this incredible conversation here to bring in the modern Sudan perspective, but also your background in art and to focus on such pottery is, I think, such a lovely, lovely combination. So thank you for taking this crazy stab in the dark. What a great place you would.
Thank you. And thanks for providing the opportunity, because I don't think people would necessarily go for something like that, or even learning about civilizations in general.
It's also quite intentional that every single Alfuzaic writer begins with the 101. Yabsura was early enough that we still had countries left at that point. We soon ran out of the countries, though. As you can imagine, there's a lot more ancient empires than they are modern countries. But regardless, having the 101 experience is so crucial. We're an educational platform, and first and foremost, let's learn about the things that make up the region: the history, the food, the language, the culture, the religion, every component. And that are the countries and the ancient empires. So I think it's pretty cool. I think this is the first time that a ancient empire is the modern country, and those are the two other people on this call. So that worked out really lovely as well.
Yeah.
Special treat for our listeners today. The two halves of the Sudanese history here on this call. So thank you for that.
Lucky listeners.
Lucky listeners, and hopefully a future writer. If you want to be part of this process, we'll take it. Any final questions for you, Absar? I find this so fascinating. Again, to our listeners, there are so many more goodies in the Kerma Empire document and article, and the Sudan 101 as well, to learn from both of these phenomenal writers. But any final questions before we wrap up here?
I think we did pretty good. I learned a lot in this process. Very much shared fun facts that I decided to note down because I was like, there's no way I'm going to forget this. So thank you so much for taking the time to allow us to show up and represent the research that we've done. And for listeners, if you do want to read about Kerma, you can just go to the website. And there's also, I found one super interesting YouTube video that shares a lot about it. So that's also another way to get more information.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, GFNX, for writing Kerma. Thank you, Yabsura, for writing Sudan 101. What a great place to have this conversation. And thank you to our phenomenal Alfuzaic community. We're so excited to continue put all of this great content out there. And if you'd like to be part of our family, you know where to find us. It's at alfuzaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net. And you can read about the Kerma Empire, the Sudan 101, and all of the other great empires, countries, and other content we have out there. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.